I was early as well. Yeah, our clocks went,
Hey
didn't they? Yeah.
guys, here we go. Here we go. One more RWI touchdown. We're coming hot here. As it's impressive. Like Stefan came and already came. Whoa! There's so much thing that I talked with TB and then Tim came and TB is already with his coffee. This is a miracle. And yeah, we're coming hot here. We're coming hot. So we're just beginning our RWI touchdown, and there's a lot, as usual, to share. Even more this year because this year is even more intense than last year. Things are more intense or more crazy, and so let's begin. We don't have to do that thing about the check-ins, but if you want to say something before we chime in and start to share whatever it comes to mind. Feel free. We can start with you, Stefan.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I enjoyed last week's session. It was useful and really, really lots of conversations. I enjoyed meeting Amanda, and there was lots of similar stuff coming up around how to work across different scales, different levels, different types of very valid ways of knowing. So rather than one winner takes all kind of thing. Um, so yeah, so I got something I might just share on that. Just before, I'm not going to share it now because I'll let everyone else share. But Tibby, if I shared that Miro, is that okay if I shared that Miro just to show the different categories, or is that only that's out there? Is that or is that you're on mute?
But Stefan, before we jump in, just ask around if people just want
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. I'm
to
just
check
letting you
in.
know. I'm gonna sign off now, but I just thought ask Tibby that. So whoever wants to go next, I don't know if it's Tim or
Well, I'm probably pretty
Bella.
slow morning for me. I'm just gonna kind of try to listen and contribute if I can.
Okay.
But yeah, like Vinicius said, lots going on. So it's always by the end of the week, pretty everybody's you know pretty tired. So yeah, that's where I'm at right now. And but it sounded really interesting what you were talking about.
I'm gonna pass it over to Tibby then. Thanks, Tim. You're on mute, by the way, Tiberius.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay, yeah. Hello, everybody. I'm pretty good, energized, and I'm exploring this new blockchain peer-to-peer platform, which is called Quartal. So, if you want to know what I learned about, we can talk about that. If not, we can talk about some other things.
I
So I
saw
pass
that,
it on
but
to who's.
yeah, I did see that Tiberius, that mention of that, but and I don't think I'd heard of it before, so I was curious.
Yeah. I could talk about it, but let's finish the round. So who's is our dear Lori here, or?
Not yet. Not yet. Maybe
Not
she
yet,
comes.
okay.
Maybe she doesn't. Because she usually this time she gets her daughters, her twin daughters.
Yeah.
So guys, feel free, Stefan, to share your screen
Okay.
and to share your thoughts around the work that you and TB have been doing. Right? It's
Yeah.
fascinating.
Okay. I just zoom in, and I'm just going to share those different categories on the Miro without going to the whole document or anything. They just talk about the types of areas here where you've got when IOPA is trying to understand how we're engaging and getting the peer-to-peer networks engaged. They were kind of also looking at, across the sorts of areas for them that's really related, and they've got business models which maybe works maybe at some levels of maker spaces or other areas. Contracts, which was what Sensorica really got engaged around, and how that can be connected to community formation and stuff. And then there's sort of machines and tools, peoples and skills, community and communications. And it just is kind of interesting seeing these kind of logics in a way, right? They were kind of breaking things down by. Not saying that this is the logic. I'm just saying it's an example of something that's being used in practice, and it sort of ties with something that I was talking about with someone this week in terms of the difference between what's used in Europe a lot, which is service logic, and what's used in North America, which is institutional logic. But you use, so when you're providing a service to someone, there can be service.
Stefan, could you share a little bit more the templates of this app? It seems something like very expensive. Loads of functions and features. To create something like that.
This is just Miro, actually.
No. I know that it's Miro, but it's the templates for an app, right?
I don't know. I think it's just I don't know quite. I think it's just a diagram for them to map out the deliverables.
It seems more like an app. I don't know if Tim
sort of got a look of it.
Concurs with me. It seems like an app.
It looks like it, but that might just be because they're all kind of from that kind of world and they start making things this way. But I think it's just the way that they've laid out their different areas to try and map out who's responsible for what and trying to make sense of things. So here they've got maker spaces.
Yeah, organizations drains a lot of energy. You need to, categorize, classified,
Yeah.
compartmentalize. You need to see how the functions of the clockwork works, right? It's crazy, man. It's crazy. But I just want to understand if you're using this as a reference for IOP, the type of work that Make is doing with IOPA and something that we can rely on to extrapolate something around the work that we've been doing, something like that?
Yeah, it seems to be fairly up to date, this document. They're still adding to it. I mean, it's not something that is an interpretation of. So this is kind of where they're kind of trying, or this is where they seem to be at in terms of breaking things down. So, but each of these will have its own. Some of these will have a service logic to it, and some of them would have a more institutional logic, and some of them have literally like a material logic, like you're just delivering a good. I sense that there's more service logic in peer-to-peer than there would be in, some other things. It's more like about just providing a goods rather than services, right? In terms of materials. So economies are broken down into goods and services often, but in this case, so yeah, I'm curious about how this question about just where people are coming from and how their remit is understood changes the way that we try and frame where we are. Because if we were to place, say, when we were doing that other work, where the idea of the ecosystem and trying to manage problems and solutions through some sort of contractual kind of regulatory process or some way to help.
I'm getting totally where we want to go with this, Stefan. But once we're now sharing this more widely to people to know about RWI, would it be nice if you could give some context for people that's just watching?
Good point.
Yes.
Okay, well, I don't know, Tibby, do you want to say any more in terms of that, or do you want me to? Basically, from a very macro perspective, we've been trying to understand how to find a way in to understand how agency happens. That's one thing, and what agency means will be different depending on what kind of context you're in, right? So even within this one project, it becomes hard to necessarily work out what that means in terms of context for agency. So there's the agency of someone out there in the environment, and there's the agency of how we can try and shape that. So for instance, contracts here are something which can afford agency, or it can maybe regulate agency out there. And it also is a question of like the agency of those that are trying to improve and develop and formulate sorts of contracts like that, particularly in a peer-to-peer environment. So you've got multiple kinds of agency happening even in relation to that. And then it's like, okay, where were we positioned? Where might we be positioned in relation to that kind of context around agency, which may be different from people, and we've been talking about this before, down peoples and skills or something over at, say, a makerspace that's maybe more distant, which maybe some aspects of IOPA has got maybe more hands-on project-based relationships with for at least a period of time. But that becomes a different focus, because maybe the unit of analysis starts to become the project, whereas in contracts, the unit of analysis might be the problem solution space that the contract.
Stefan, my dear, you're still in the specifics. Would be nice if one of you guys do a high level explanation and contextualization for who is watching this.
Okay.
Yeah. So let me also add something here. Stefan spoke about agency. So that's sort of our mission within the Sensorica environment, is to help IOPA understand how to align agencies in a material peer production system, in a network that engages in production. Okay, so you have the capitalist production, supply chain. A corporation designs, innovates, then manufactures something, maybe outsources some of the manufacturing, and then products are assembled and distributed worldwide. Decentralized manufacturing or decentralized fabrication or production. The equivalent would be a network of designers create some designs to solve some solutions. This could be like open source hardware artifacts, and then the production, the fabrication happens locally within makerspaces, fab labs, which are digital fabrication spaces. Sometimes grassroots organizations create these spaces, and they have digital fabrication capabilities, so they can download, let's say, a CAD file representing a 3D object, and then 3D print it, and that object will be used locally. So we have these two modes of production. And so what Stefan is showing here is a diagram from IOPA, Internet of Production Alliance. So that's a sort of it's an organization. It's a non-profit organization that lives on grants and tries to make distributed or decentralized production more efficient, more effective. And that is that is an organigram. Essentially, that's how they manage these projects. Which is different from the diagrams that we made that focus specifically on aligning agencies in networks of production. So aligning agencies meaning just making sure that everybody's goal, everybody's actions are aligned. So this complex system of fabrication, it's coherent, it's effective, it's efficient, rather than having a lot of people pulling in their directions for different type of motivation, and then nothing really happens, or things that happen don't respect standards or quality or that stuff. So yeah. So I guess Stefan, you're trying to look at I didn't understand. If you can repeat the service logic versus the project logic, or
yeah, well, trying to understand what different contexts are understood as in these environments and how they get broken down. And service logic can be one way people think of that, where you're looking at the way that services are provided at a more local level institutional logic could be more how it's understood at the funding scale, or at the
Yes, yes.
institutional scale. And often that's more North American. But like you're saying here, the nature of that work where you're trying to get everyone to pull in the same direction, that's when you're spinning up a project where you're trying to get a minimum amount of alignment. Because a lot of the maker spaces could be doing other work, which is much more just bespoke personal work, which doesn't have to have that alignment. So it's almost like when something's trying to spin up at a scale, how does that happen? Would that be true? Like maker spaces don't always have to make stuff which is
Yeah. So this
So you mean Mhm.
this organogram, this how UPA deals with the production of any type of goods or products or materials,
No,
whatever.
this is pulled from IOPA's internal documents. So
Okay,
so
okay.
they have two main organizations, one in Europe, one in the United States. They work with a foundation, they get some money. But to get some money, they write some proposals, and those proposals have some projects. We're going to work on standards for open source design. We're going to work on mapping, developing mapping tools, mapping standards to know where these locations for local fabrication could be, and what are the capabilities. So this organigram helps them just manage the project. Okay, so we're going to have this department. Some people are working on that thing. Some people are working on contracting. And what you see in this diagram is you probably see my name in Sensorica saying that, okay, so this contracting part is like outsourced to Sensorica. So they're going to do it. Yeah, so it's more like internal management. And IOPA, it's a sort of a hybrid organization that functions mostly as just a nonprofit organization with a community around. But that community, it's not really lively. Let's say it doesn't have too much of an input. So it's essentially managed as a core group of individuals that are involved in writing grants and distributing this funding to people that work. They hire people, and in some rare cases, they kind of outsource, but rarely crowdsource stuff. They mostly outsource stuff. Crowdsource work. I mean.
Thanks for
Yeah,
that,
so it's just like
that
internal
was great.
stuff. But you could see from this diagram how they see the relationships between some of their projects. Yeah, which is not an analytical way of looking at the real ecosystem out there of peer production. Yeah.
and
I'm
I
having
don't
a
think
hard
they're
time.
describing the ecosystem of peer production with this diagram.
I'm having a hard time focusing with that little Miro thing going. Is there?
oh yeah, I know.
Is there a little X there? Can we click that X or hit that
yeah,
note?
sorry,
Yeah.
yeah.
Right.
You're right. Yes, that's a good point. I mean, also to the ecosystem. That was a question of. This is what I'm really interested in. Is the logic? Is we were mapping out the ecosystem as seen from a cybernetic resource hub, IB. You could we were looking at contracts as a cybernetic resource, and therefore that's how things would look from that perspective, which would look very different if you were doing it from a project management perspective.
Yes.
Or a machines and tools and equipment stocking perspective or whatever. So the ecosystems, in our case, they're ecosystems of information and sense making. So then that contextualizes what was being done there. So if we were to look back at, say, this is what it's trying to do, say the stuff that was going on when we're looking here, this was like a cybernetic hub in the middle, trying to understand the different aspects that the contracts could help reduce problems and provide solutions around. But then that gives a way into that, because one of the challenges we're having is, okay, we've got all of this, but in all of this process, how can we actually find where an agent would be, either as themselves in agency, or at least in their capacity representing an agency, and that's still been something that's been hard to do. But I think part of the reason for that is it's to be able to be really clear what is the middle part, which is the ecosystem from.
But Stefan, if I get it right, and I think I did, once I'm involved with this project too, the thing is that IOPA works with this institutional, grant-oriented, skeleton force dynamics, right? Where you have few people dealing, energizing, let's put it this way, this whole ecosystem that IOPA operates in. But it's not resilient. It's a kind of a snapshot of what is happening in the peer-to-peer makerspace world, for instance, and they just want to, if I understood well, they just want to evolve or want to expand this type of modeling, right, through the peer-to-peer makerspace, Fab Lab, hackerspace worldwide, right? And we critically look at it and said, hey, it's impossible to scale up or scale down in your terminology. Thinking about expanding with this type of framing, but of course we didn't say like that, right? We didn't put like that. We contextualize the complexity around, because they operate not considering complexities, not considering different perspectives and agencies, right? So the last time I talked with Chibi said that you find a way, you found a way to glue, or to be, let's say, a bridge, to do a bridge between the work, within the work that we did and the work that they expect to do, right? And it would be interesting for you and TB to highlight what could be this bridge, right? Because when I look at the work that we have been doing, it's amazing work. It's really groundbreaking and fascinating work, right? Network, a peer-to-peer paradigm in the networks of networks dynamics. But I feel that we are light years, like we're in a different galaxy, right? Or different mechanics, right? So it would be nice for you and Chibi to highlight what pathway that you guys found that would be nice, that we can regain, let's say, the partnership still continues, if I understood well, but we can regain the flow or the flex to deliver something that is concrete for them, right? So that's my.
Well, this is a good point, and we're trying to. I think that's trying to contextualize what we've got in this sense is really important. And I think you're right. Why doesn't we can't just scale ecosystems any more than you can scale systems in the way we normally talk about them. So, for instance, we can say, okay, because normally, say you've got we've got an ecosystem where we've got a fish, and they've got another fish eats this fish, and we've got the fact that this fish eats food. So you've got this kind of ecosystem idea that, oh yeah, we've got an ecosystem. We've got small fish, big fish, food. Okay. From the ecosystem perspective, and there is one, you could look at that with different perspectives. Okay. You could focus on it. You could unbridge it. So the observer of that ecosystem is one thing. and they will have a setting. Are they looking at it through one type of logic? But in reality, that ecosystem does not look the same, even that one, from the agency of the small fish, from the agency of the big fish, from the agency of the food. That's not the same as the ecosystem as mapped out from the outside. The agency from the inside is a whole different beast. And that's where, and it's much, our whole way of working is all about putting something out there as a system map, effectively, or a system diagram. Whereas if we're trying to look at agency, then you have to sort of say, okay, where's the agent in that? And where's the other agent in that? And where's their relationship? And we got closer to that here. But my feeling, and this is the important thing, is it's very easy to jump back to a systems map perspective, right? To jump back to this is now representative. Whereas this, are you seeing this circle here, the four circles? Is that showing up on your screen?
Yeah.
Yeah. Is in the center.
But
say the center is an agent. Say the center is an agent. So okay,
explain a little bit. Explain, please, man. Because I understand totally what is in this diagram, because I participated with you in the co-creation of it, but people that are going to see this later is not going to understand that. All that.
Well,
if you can explain what is mapped out there.
Well, this is part of it. Is it a map or not? First, so we naturally say what's mapped out there. What's the system? What's the model? Let's say we take another way of looking at this, right? And Timmy's trying to go that route, all right? Although I don't necessarily think you need to hold on to the cell language in order to do this, but it helps get into the metaphor of the agent, i.e. like a cell. A cell is a cell, right? The cell does what a cell can do. So if the middle here is basically the ecosystem, but what I could say the agency of the cybernetic resource hub, i.e. the ability to manage action, to manage agency. In this case, we're looking at it, and there's a couple of useful dimensions that could be used for that, because this sort of actually just comes out of literally how people have tried to manage resource hubs, right? They weren't necessarily thinking theoretically entirely, they were thinking conceptually to help manage resources. But in this case, if the agent in the middle, that middle circle, is that ability to, through 6 different kinds of agency or interaction, deal with their place in the ecosystem rather than the ecosystem. Does that make sense? There's a difference, like I say, being the small fish, then the small fish is just in there, right? And then the next two, the two are how made sense for the kind of central cybernetic resource. And that's why I would say you need to put Sensorica in the middle there to some extent, as this worldview, this values thing is particularly informed by the contracts focus, right? If you were to put maker spaces in the middle, you probably wouldn't have this, right? Because they're not entirely doing the same sort of cybernetic control or cybernetic peer-to-peer paradigm. So the effective thing is this central circle is this resource hub. Let me zoom in on it. And then outside of that are, okay, in relation to that, what are the problem solution spaces that can relate to that? What are the sort of areas whereby, does this go any bigger? No, that's as big as it goes. Let me just see if there's one that goes a bit more here. So we've kind of got a conceptual framework of sort of the cybernetic hub, and outside of that is like, where's the problem solutions? So problems and solutions as a way of looking at the worldview is something that's particularly relevant to someone in the middle who is trying to do some sort of cybernetic resource hub. It's not necessarily how someone else would look at it, right? Because then they may have no agency in terms of helping to address problems and solutions outside of, and problems often for them are things that they try and put up the chain. They just get on, they do their work. If they can't solve and do what they need to do in the moment, that's when they might try and call Sensorica up or try and contact someone who's got more agency to look at a macro scale. But if you're in a maker space in a place in Africa, you're thinking at that scale, okay? They're not at the scale of how to cybernetically manage the contracts because they don't have that macro agency. So, you know, you've got
Yeah.
scale in there and all of that. So this then makes sense from that. And that's why I believe that it's worth putting people in here as what times are they part of this agency, either directly or strategically. And then you've got the question of, okay, the problem solutions, as seen from the middle, where might someone from IOPA be? Where might someone, and we do actually have this diagram set up such that the furthest outermost part is basically the broader environment. You basically hit a point where it's beyond our ability to infer, as is most things, right? Because from Montreal, you can only get so much. You're trying to do as much as you can through using things like the tools. That's what's relevant to this chat in a way. The sort of tools that you use to get some sort of cybernetic agency on the environment, make it more manageable, make it peer-to-peer work, still only can go so far. Your sphere of influence only goes so far. And then at some point, it depends on the nature of what's going on locally in different other contexts. And that's why I would call this more of a sense-making canvas or a framework into which it can be populated, and therefore the agency makes sense here. And that caveat, I think, is really important.
So let me give my interpretation, because there's a tension here about how to go and shed more light into peer production. Okay.
Yeah.
So so first of all, this is a model that we designed. Essentially, Mason came with some ideas, and then I added on top of that. So through this interaction, we hacked something because we had to deliver some some understanding, some sense making, some way to process information from the ground and deliver some understanding to IOPA. So this whole diagram here represents an agent. Okay, so this is a pattern that is general. Okay, these concentric lines are a pattern that you find at any scale. Okay, so essentially what the map says is that anything that could be presented as a living system, be it an individual, a makerspace, or an organization like IOPA, which are all part of this ecosystem, okay, what they're doing is that they're sensing their environment. That's the outermost layer, okay, and they have some sensors, okay, they have a membrane with sensors. They have their way to experience their environment, okay, so that is the layer that says problems. Wait a second, what is it? Yeah, problems. That is the layer because some of these effects from the environment, okay, we interpret them as problems. Okay, we interpret them as problems, as, you know, I'm trying to do something and I can't. Okay, so that's the mode of existing of any living system, living organisms. You know, we're trying to do stuff. Okay, reality is what it is, and we have a model of reality, and we use that model of reality, which is the concentric, which is the center of this diagram. We have a model of this reality. We experience stuff, and we use that model to produce a response, and then whoops, it doesn't work, right? And we call that a problem. We call that a problem. And then what happens is that we go back to the center, we go back to our representation of the environment, to our model of the environment, and tweak that and to produce a new solution. Okay, so that pattern is universal. All the living systems experience their environment. Some of these effects they get interpreted as problems, and then there is a response, right? So, for example, you have a cell or a fish in an environment, and the water the water temperature increases a lot. So the fish knows how to deal with that. Either it gets away from there or produces some, I don't know, biological responses to the heat so that it can cope with the heat, right? So that's universal,
Can I just,
and
I just
that
chat?
that's
Okay. Can I just jump in there
that's
though?
my way. So just a second. So
Okay.
that's my way of being in the ecosystem. That's a makerspace's way of being in the ecosystem, and that's also the IOPA, Internet of Production, this organization that operates at the ecosystemic level. They want to make sure that all these other agents can efficiently work together. Okay. They also have the same way of being and interacting within the environment. And the center of that is essentially the way they see things. Okay, so they see an ecosystem out there because they're operating on the ecosystem. Now, if you talking about a makerspace, we're going to use exactly the same diagram, but what changes? So it's the same pattern, but what changes is the core. Okay, so instead of having these things in the core that say, developers, infrastructure builders, animators, model builders, and all that, resources, what they have would probably be, things that it's their business model. It's how they pay their rent. It's how they respond to, I don't know, orders that come. I don't know, some clients, some people want to use the space. So they have their own model, okay? So what they're sensing is their immediate environment. Stuff comes in and they metabolize that into some community vibes, and they metabolize that so that they can increase their membership, and they metabolize that as financial gain, so they can pay their membership, they can pay their rent and internet connection, and so on and so forth. So the agent is actually that, you see. So what we're trying to do now with IOPA is to go out there and talk to different actors. Could be an individual that is part of a makerspace, could be a makerspace at a larger scale, or could be things like IOPA that operate at maybe there is a group that works on a cryptocurrency for makerspaces. Okay, that's somebody that operates at the ecosystemic level because it provides infrastructure for all these actors to use and send payments to each other, right? Or maybe there's a group that creates platforms for online collaboration. That's also an ecosystemic actor, right? So we asked them, like, what are the problems that you see immediately? Okay, what are the effects in your environment that you interpret as problems? And then thanks to Stefan's contributions, we need to realize that their expression of a problem is linked to their context. Okay, so somebody may say, well, in the makerspace, we don't have enough money. Okay, and so that is a statement. It's true because that's what they live. That's the reality. But the question now is, from that level, this is what you experience is a lack of funding. But maybe that problem is ecosystemic. Okay, maybe there is no funding because makerspaces are not trusted as reputable fabrication spaces in the current economy. So that is an ecosystemic problem. Why? Because it's not just that makerspace's problem. It's the reputation of the whole makerspace movement. So we all have to work together to rebrand makerspaces and communicate something like quality, or maybe we should adopt some standards, get our shit together, and be able to produce stuff that is of a higher quality. Okay, so you see that the statement "we don't have money," okay, you can translate it into another statement that it could be more valid at other scales. So the individual that is embedded in the makerspace and experiences reality there, that's the only thing he sees. He may not see the larger picture, okay? So what we're trying to do is take statements of problems from these agents and try to translate them to a level that IOPA can understand at the ecosystemic level. Oh, that guy said he doesn't have money. It doesn't mean I have to give them money. That's not how I solve their problem, by giving them money. Because if there is an issue with the quality of what they produce, okay, that's not going to solve the problem. I will have to give them money infinitely. Okay, it's like it's a never-ending thing. So how can I? So maybe the problem statement is, makerspaces are unable to generate income because what they do is of a low quality, and there is no trust for them in the ecosystem. So they may need some rebranding, they may need some better tools, they may need some I don't know, some standards. Okay, so now that is a statement that IOPA can process because they deal with ecosystemic problems. Okay, so the statement, we don't have enough money, okay, can be translated to some other things that IOPA can directly work on. Okay, but when we listen to every agent, we essentially can plot their problem solutions on top of the same map, the same concentric, the same diagram, let's say. Okay, and what happens outside of the diagram is the interpretation. Like, what is this statement? What does it mean at the level of the ecosystem? You see, is it really a local economic problem? What about the other maker spaces around? Are they experiencing the same thing? Oh, there's a pattern here. So there must be something larger than just mismanagement of a local space. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah. Okay. Can we?
Yeah,
So if we break that down. Okay.
very bright, interesting observations on the chat. Would you like to comment on, Tim?
I just wrote it pretty much how I was hearing it a little bit, and it's not quite exactly that, but maybe that's a helpful 2 cents in there to make sense of this confusion. And I don't mean that. I mean that, yeah, I actually, it was getting clearer and clearer for me as you kind of kept going, and now I get, just how it's going, and because I know a bit about Stephen's other approaches and things, and
Yeah.
also some of the, the background theories, if you like, and ideas, right? The word generator is obviously insufficient, but it being more in a process view, it kind of allowing for opening up a gateway and a bridge over into more of a process view of the dynamics that are going on as that kind of attempt or aspiration to have just I think a more fine-tuning capacity, or a fine-tuning and more dynamic and responsive, and in sort of a constructively responsive more of the time, to make drawing upon the information that's available to achieve that, and that this sort of or you use the word Vinicius at the beginning, or organogram, or whatever, the organizational map sort of thinking that oftentimes things get left at, or started from with a lot of gravity, isn't there's increasingly a lot of interesting other different ways to do it, and this one kind of generates a new capacity, I think. So it's kind of, get the way you call it, like a canvas. So I thought that was a good word. It's probably still not quite a good enough word, you know what I mean? Like, there's a lot there. So yeah, I think this thing's sort of going to unfold in a lot of different ways. It's hard. It's kind of in motion itself. So we're in a process about et cetera. Yeah. So I was just throwing that little thing in the sidebar to try to point in that direction, because I guess if you are looking at this like an organizational map, like a static representational structural thing that is universalized kind of across the ecosystem, then that could be really confusing. And I think nudging in the direction of a process view of this diagram more so might help make it make more sense sometimes, I think. That's all.
No, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, CTV and Stefan, Tim, we're still mapping things with a very structural perspective, a very structuralistic perspective. Like when you conceptualize the institutional dimension, the dimension of the work itself, or the dimension of people, And I know that we have to work with this, right? But if we're talking about something that is more emergent, more complex doing, more interactive, I think that the lines are blurred. Things are not very well defined. And this talks to what you've been talking, you've been sharing with us, Stefan, about scaling up and scaling down, you see? And it's like a zooming out, zooming in, but when you do that, everything changes, right? The agency, the perspective, and things like that. And and I think that that's the challenge. That's the challenge that we have ahead of us. We have in front of us, front and ahead of us. How to doubt, uh, understanding that the world is becoming more and more complex, and complexity is becoming part of our lives. It's just to do what we're doing, what they are doing, and what they are doing is like a lab rat experiment. It's just a modeling, like science in a reductionistic way does things, right? So you just model, you just put some inputs there just to see if it functions. So yeah, and once more, I just want to have a better grasp of what you guys really, uh, put pierce the nerve in the last 2 weeks to see how we can better thrive, how we can better encompass, uh, regain their uh, their the trustability in the type of work that we're doing, right? And in order for them to really validate that this is a critical path for them to evolve, for us and the work that we're doing with them to evolve.
Can I say one thing to that, Vinicius? I think to get validity, there's a temptation in research, traditional research, for it to be as universal as possible, right? So therefore, this would apply to all these other things that somehow gives, in theory, more validity. But I think that's a danger in complexity work and ecosystem work, and in the sense that an agency-based work and practices, let's under promise on that. We don't need, it is really at the moment is, if there's a type of frame in the middle that's useful for a type of agent in the middle, and that agent has confirmed that, then we can say that it's useful and helpful in relation to that, and that gives us something concrete to work off. If that agent is effectively Tibi and Sensorica in relation to interacting, so the question is, how representative is that for other people like Sensorica, or other people who might be trying to do the same sort of contract work or the same sort of, but that's enough. That is enough scope. If we know, because the advantage of that is you know where you are, and then if it's relating, and it could be relating to many things, to the field of internet production and its problems of solution around the outside relating to that, where's that kind of agent in relation to that? And it may or may not scale or be universal, because like you say, that changes. And that's just, again, that's the trap of trying to validate for the sake of what? You understand? The validation is really, how useful is this to understand?
It's like what you're saying is we're compelled into a confirmation bias on our org chart.
Yes.
And on our process model diagram, which is not tracking the change.
Yes, because it somehow feels that's more valid, if that makes sense. And the more we can.
Well, the purpose of a system is what it does, and the first thing it does is preserve and conserve itself. Right. Or else it doesn't persist. So it's just the inertia of it's I'm sort of speaking in broad strokes, you know what I mean? But I think I'm just trying to localize, I think, what the sense of what you're getting at there when you said for what, when you said for
Yeah.
what just then, what I kind of heard was that, yeah, for what, that I kind of answered it in my own mind. For what? Well, I guess it must be for the process diagram that got drawn up over in drafting or whatever, last week. You know what I mean? That didn't seem, that fell a little flat. Didn't quite seem to, I get what you mean by like for what the kind of.
Yeah, I mean, you could say an active inference says the purpose of an agent is to preserve, well, a map itself. If that makes there's an ent, but so you've got a sense of the system.
Well,
Yeah.
it's well-being and
Yes,
activity and a lot of things that are more than just, kind of the same representation,
exactly,
right?
exactly. So you
That's
could
the
say that,
thing.
yeah, that middle grey area could be, if we're taking a more agent active inference approach, it's trying to maintain its sense of self in the role of cybernetic resource hub to some extent, a way of helping to maintain. And this, because there's some more universal elements to this anyway, where you have agent, environment, and what's in between, that comes from other stuff. I mean, we use that elsewhere, but so there will be some universalities in terms of how that could be bridged out, but that's not necessarily like the purpose of stage 3 when we were trying to work through this was how can we go from what was an even more kind of conceptually abstract version of thinking about makerspaces previous to that, the kind of the model where you just have NGOs and you have and you have makerspaces and you have clients or whatever, to something which is a bit more granular. So we can place someone there. And if you want to have an agent-based approach, you need to define where your agent is. And this is one thing I would say, the danger is if you start saying that the whole diagram is the agent, because again, that temptation, well, that you can say the whole diagram is where the agent is sort of embedded in a context potentially. But the nature of this is a kind of agent in the middle of which there could be all these different possible ways. But this hasn't taken an agent and said, okay, for that agent, what's happening? Because you can't have all of these things happening for everyone at every moment, right? And if they are, so for instance, it talks about here clarifying volunteers versus paid work, right, in terms of solution. Well, then there may be some agent that has an ability to clarify volunteering versus paid work. And that would be that agent then would have their own ecosystem they're in, but they would have a relationship there, if you see, between this cybernetic hub and say, okay, they would be the kind of agent which this cybernetic hub might be relating, or dissemination distribution, this hub might provide mechanisms to make that better. But if you've got highlighting decentralized versus distributed, or local versus global, only certain other agents out there in the kind of interactions out there with the world would have that kind of agency. And note that these aren't actually the agency themselves. This is kind of the meta understanding of what that agency would help in terms of solutions, the sort of locus of control. So from an agent perspective, there is no such thing as an ecosystem level, in my mind. There is no ecosystem level. Like everything is ecosystem, right? Nothing, the observer is in an ecosystem, the diagram is in an ecosystem, the agents in all their levels, they're all in ecosystems, right? There is no ecosystem level, because the point of a level is like a game, right? That's what we use to gamify things.
Yeah, I'll just quick. Can I just throw something in? I just saw
Yeah.
last, a little while ago, there was a paper that came out, and I'd meant to throw it in a chat. I referred to it, I think, in chat the other day, but I never went back and found it. But it's I'll hunt for it. But it speaks of what they call trophic levels, and I think maybe what you're getting at a little bit here is kind of parallel to what would be called in a natural ecosystem trophic levels.
Yeah.
What is that? Can you define?
Well, I'd rather leave it to that paper, but it speaks to a sort of a kind of like 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 a stratification, like a like in a stratified geology, layers and layers, one layer
Yeah.
upon another, so levels, okay? But each layer is not meant to represent some sort of static stuff or whatever. It's more a layer that operates at a certain logic of energy in terms of the
So,
living.
is there a relation with the notion of Markov blanket?
Well, that's a little orthogonal, I think, maybe to it, right? It's more about the fact that there's a certain sort of metabolomic metabolism sort of happening at this level that happens like it's like these little unicellular things and they munch this and munch that, right? But that above that is a layer where there's a different kind of movement of the energy through the life cycles, and maybe they are subsisting upon the lower trophic level in terms of energy reprocessing, energy availability, like the plants growing in the soil and the birds on top of the plants and the I don't know, cats eating the birds, and on many levels. So these trophic levels are an attempt to try to categorialize, if you like, the processes that are going on that can be sort of grouped according to some kind of principles. But the paper would, I'm sure, explain it.
That makes sense. Yeah, I think that's you're basically getting at the idea. There's an agent in here somewhere. The trophic levels are related to the types of agent and what they experience. I mean, it gets hard to, yeah, and we're
Well,
trying.
what I'm getting at is, I guess, what it speaks to in a way, calling back to a conversation a minute ago, is when someone said something about like, oh, the cell doesn't always need to be a cell.
Yeah.
To say that it always is a cell is to be remaining within a part of one trophic level, perhaps.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Whereas there are other levels, and therefore that statement, it doesn't just have to be viewed as a cell, is a good sort of grounding for where this then goes a little beyond to say there's other kinds of stuff, and sometimes it's not a thing even,
And sort of taking that also further is if rather than naming what it is, if you say how does it act, how does it have agency? So if there's like you say, you can get trapped in this kind of whole levels things when we have to name things and ontologically sort of state them. Whereas, okay, we're talking about a cell, we're sort of saying an agent that has the level of a cell that has the ability to control and interact other cells in a body, right? Well, in another kind of agency in the middle is essentially what you're looking at. But within that, and I can't put them, like if we were looking at talking to contributors and feeding back, and within that, there's going to be sort of sub-agencies. Like, as you know, if you're in the middle and you're dealing with contributors about ecosystem mapping, or you're trying to understand problem solutions and help improve the situation for contributors, that is a sub-agency. Like you can't be doing all the things in the middle. I mean, the middle is an ecosystem of its own kind of options. The idea is the middle captures the 6 key kinds of ways agency could happen in terms of resource hubs, support, interacting with users, interacting with contributors, distribution, dissemination, cognitive drivers and models, and just general financial and material resources. They're all things, they're all labels. So that has to actually be something when it is an action. So what action relates to contributors clarifying volunteers versus paid work in relation to problems, and what would be the potential for the agent in the middle ecosystem, which may be more the Sensorica ecosystem and peer-to-peer, and then there may be something which is more the IOPA project-based aspect, and there might be something which is more the person running a makerspace in Africa. And in this case, agency-wise, not ecosystem, systemic-wise, but agency within ecological systems, we would put this in the middle. Okay, and there's that, but the and clearly, if you have an agent and you have an environment, that would be consistent across nearly anything you do. Right? Anyway, you can say there's an agent in the environment. You could although whether you externalize it is one thing. Let's just say we are dealing with just the relatively external cognitive environment around us, as opposed to the quality of the oxygen in the air that goes into our lungs. Let's just say that's universal. But the bit in between the agency and the environment, in this case, problem solutions is what makes sense. Because we've got that kind of agency happening. We've got a cybernetic resource for doing contracts around material peer production. But I've never put problem solution in there before. I normally put interactions and affordances as a general topic. And then it can bounce out in all sorts of ways, depending if I'm working with a community. What goes in there is actually up for problem development. I'm trying to work that out. But the danger is if you pull back to a systems mapping view, you're back to a things view, you're back to a labels view, which is it's separate. So how do you keep it down to the agency and then the agents in the agency? So for instance, if this middle bit is what we would call in outcome mapping, they would call that sphere of control. Like the middle bit is roughly the ecosystem where there's a sphere of control. The middle bit is what we call a sphere of influence, and then beyond that they call it the sphere of impact, of which you can't directly control at all. You've got control of this, you have some influence on the problem solution space as a cybernetic hub. You can't solve all problems, you can't get rid of them, you're just there to help, right? And the impact is something you can't know until you retrospectively maybe get someone else's opinion. You don't know the results unless someone out there gives you feedback on the outcomes. So, and that's fine. That's just the nature of it. And that scopes things down an awful lot. The agent isn't then the whole thing. The agency isn't the whole thing. We're not at some special ecosystem level or any of that. But what you do have to do is you have to be able to define in that conceptual framework where might people be in a particular instance. That's what I would want, because the aim is that we can go through this journey to get to a point where within the kind of logic, because we're still in a logic, but in the logic that connects enough to agency, we could find a way to understand where we could meaningfully at least place 2 or 3 key actors in this kind of piece. And what I would like to then be doing, if I've got that, that gives me a common ground to go and do infusion space for one of those actors in one of those moments. Because now we know that if we have 5 actors and they can all relate to each other here in the logic of this particular agency, for this particular domain, at this particular scale, then the infusion space could go and find stuff which is more adjacent and maybe even a bit more distant, and but it's got a common grounding. And that common grounding is what this hopefully can give, or it's close to giving. It's not quite there yet, because it hasn't got a way to place that an agent there yet. I think that's where it could go.
But you can do that, because that diagram is not meant to plot agents, individual agents. Okay, it's not meant for that.
No,
we can do a diagram that because before you do a diagram, we have to ask the question: what is the purpose? What are you trying to do? Okay. So when people do like a business model canvas, they do a business model canvas. Okay, it has a structure, that canvas. It is what it is, because some business consultants, they got together and they said, how can we help entrepreneurs think about different aspects of the business in order to increase the probability of success? So that is the why of the canvas. Okay, so the canvas is related to the why. Okay, that was the primary motivation. How can we package something to codify, okay, a thinking process, okay, to structure a thinking process in order to increase the possibility of an entrepreneur of success when they launch a business. Okay, so they created this tool, this canvas. Okay, so depends what you're trying to do. So for this canvas that we have in front of us, the why is how can we help IOPA better make decisions and act within the ecosystem of material production to make it more reliable, to make it more streamlined, to make it more efficient. So now, if you want to do infusion space, I think what you could do is to take the same diagram, and so let's suppose that the individual that you're talking to is a placekeeper, is somebody that runs a makerspace. Okay, and then what you essentially do by interrogating that individual, you're populating this diagram, but you're mostly working at the core, at the center. Like, how do you see your economic model? Okay, and through that model, what do you see as problems of your organization within the context that you operate? So you essentially, you can still go through problem solutions, because that's very much part of a business language. The company has a problem. The company has a financial problem. The company has a human resource problem. The company has leadership problems. It's very much part of a business language. Okay, we see companies as machines that perform or don't perform well, and if they don't perform well, it's because they have a problem, right? And you may say that's a very you may say that this is not the proper way of looking at a business, but in some sense it is. In some sense it is, because there could be, when somebody comes to fix your company, it's because they're looking at your processes and they see, well, there's a bottleneck there. Okay, things don't flow properly. It's like your body at some point, you feel tired, you go to the hospital, the doctor will find the problem. Okay, your vein is clogged up. You see, and then they address that. Okay, so problem solution is very much part of the thinking of economic reality. Okay, when you talk about an agent. So I guess the inquiry would be to populate a canvas like that, to ask the guy, first of all, let's see what is your economic or business model for your makerspace, and that is the information processing unit that allows this individual to speak about problems. Because when he says we have this and that problem, it processes that based on some world effects. Okay, how do you know we have a problem? Well, we don't have enough clients in the companies. You have a problem. We don't have enough clients. That's the world that is responding. It's beyond his control. Okay, but his control is within. Okay, so we have that. We sense a problem. People are not coming to buy our stuff. We sense the problem. Okay, and the way the guy speaks about that, first of all, he has to he expresses it as a problem, but what he uses in his brain to formulate the language about that observation is a model that he has about his business. Okay, so you spoke about affordances and affecting the environment, but it's not just that, because the affordances, we put them there, we make them available based on a model. You see,
No, I would disagree.
The affordances,
that bit, I hear what you're saying on that. But there's two ways of looking at that. Can I just say one thing? Someone's rubbing their microphone, but there's an important point with that. I think this is a really good piece, though. You're making some good points. Vinicius wants to say something, though. Go on, then.
Tim wants to say something, but I just want to add 2
Sorry.
You see, TB, the thing is, we live in an era of hyper objects, right? So you have climate change as a hyper object. You have this global macroeconomic crisis as a micro object. So
we can't hear you. Go ahead.
Now it's better now. It's better now.
Yeah.
I'm saying that we live in a hyper objects era, like climate change, like the global economic macroeconomic crisis, like the geopolitical macro political geopolitical crisis. You see all sorts of poly crisis or meta crisis. So all sorts of hyper objects, right? That we can have a grasp on it. So it's impossible to be
object oriented in this sense. It has to be context oriented, and we will never have the perfect grasp of what is happening moment by moment, right? I think that I would add that, but I want to pass to Tim because Tim is with his digital hand up. So Tim, go on.
Yeah, thanks. I wanted to key in on a moment when Tiberius was speaking to reinforce maybe that idea of the trophic levels I mentioned earlier, and also to ameliorate what might have sounded severe about process diagrams and organizational charts. And what Tiberius was sort of essentially saying at one moment there was, but we need this, we need the org charts, we need the process diagrams, right? And what occurred to me just as you said that was this idea of like, language and things or different, the idea that, yeah, we need it because that's where we're at. And you always have to start from where you're at, right? And so that is sort of the ecosystem of understanding that is emerged in this time to deal with, things, industrial revolution stuff, whatever, but just like we sort of theorize or imagine in our minds, the idea of that language, sort of supervened upon some sort of earlier utterances or communication or music, maybe, this sort of thing, right? What we're looking at here is maybe speculating in a way that there's another trophic level in this sort of conceptual idea, of ecosystem thinking. There's another trophic level that maybe it's underneath it, maybe, I don't know, maybe it's above it, I don't know where, maybe it crosses through it or it's transverse, who knows, but that there's some other level that now may be supervening or being able to emerge to supervene upon that sort of more static, a little bit more like you used to joke about shelfware when a management consulting gig would go in and spend like 2 years doing a bunch of process diagrams, and then it gets delivered, and where does it go? Straight up on a shelf in a whole row of white binders and never to be opened again. That was sort of a trope, if you like, that people would joke about, shelfware. So in a way, this is saying maybe that there's another trophic level of sense making in this realm that we could look at here.
Can I chip in on that? Because I think that's a good point there that you've made, Tim. We want this codified structure that helps our thinking process. I mean, we sort of mentioned that, and we have to be careful that, like, when we just talk about an ecosystem, we're not really just talking about the same thing we normally talk about in terms of systems, right? Which is just that thinking process. And so, how do we go from that to agency? And I mean, the way that they do it with complexity work with Cynthia Kurtz is you basically try and people use case studies, or you try and capture what actually happened, like raw narratives. I mean, that's what Cynthia Kurtz does, Dave Snowden. You're basically just saying, this is what happens, rather than this is what I think needs to happen, which is what a problem is. A problem is, I've seen stuff happen, I've looked at it, and in my opinion, this is a problem. And it would be better if this problem could go away, which is a useful thing to know because it gives a sense of what's important. But one way to work out what's going on from an agency perspective or as a grounding, especially when you've got people from multiple agents in multiple disciplines, in multiple places, and peer-to-peer is going to have that in bucket loads, is how do we just have the canvas give a sense of what's happening in a moment? And therefore you need to start with a moment. And the challenge is, if you start with a moment as a whole narrative story, that narrative story has come from one person or one people. So you immediately now generalized and aggregated all this complexity out there. So as opposed to like, okay, we're going to take from this space, this is what we were thinking was important with agency for us. And these are the sorts of things we'd like to have happen. How have other people been positioned in relation to that?
But Stefan, the narrative story can be a meme, can come out of a memeplex.
Yeah.
It can be hovering around us, you know, coming from the institutional dynamics or the organizational dynamics or whatever. Don't forget that.
Yeah.
And it can have the nature of a source. It can have,
Yes.
you know, in the whole source sync, you know, and stock flow sort of notion and thinking, right? It can have the operational conception of a like a source, and then also a flow, you know, to where you know, just speaking in broad strokes.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And this is where they do talk about this in kind of action research. You know, you have the funnel, right? So you've got the MEMS, you've got the things that you think are important to deal with within that. But when coming down, and particularly with agencies, those are all MEMS that we're like in our cognitive realm. They're in our kind of like our codified structure of thinking, right? But just what happens, and even what happens is a story, which is still us reimagining. So the idea of infusion space is on another thing, which is separate to this, is if in this case it's not even asking to go to what was happening in a moment of action in some sort of intentional action management space, but at least where are we in terms of the relationship based on a particular macro agent, which could be a cybernetic resource hub to try and manage internet peer production. Where are other agents, even at this scale of story, the scale of my role in this whole episode is, but it'd be like you'd still do it for a particular kind of situation. Like we're trying to make cars versus we're trying to make face masks, right? Or we're trying to make solve a problem in relation to a bad actor, right? I don't know, but the key thing is it's not what we think it would be. It's just what actually
totally
happens, a real event.
I totally agree with you, and now it came from me in my mind here that the type of agency that we all here, independent of the context that we're talking about, that we have in real life, is more like a cell than it's like a molecule, because it comes aggregated with the memeplex, aggregated with all sorts of influences, cultural influences. So it's not something pure, let's put it this way, coming out of Vinicius or coming out of Stefan, coming out of Tim or Tibi. It's an aggregate of things that we can call the agency that I'm having in the environment, right? So that's why I'm saying it's like more like a cell, or an aggregate of different cells, right? Because it can't be detached of all of these complexities and all of these cultural influences and all of these other agencies around me. Do you agree with that, Stefan?
Yeah, absolutely. And that agency is then couched in the situation it's in. You put the cells in salt water, it might like it might not like it. There'll be an agency for it to metabolize. You know, there will be the environment, the structures, and how that changes over time. Because the thing with us is, as we change tasks, it changes, right? I want to have a shower, right? First thing I do is I get undressed, I go in there, I turn the shower on, at which point there's still no water. Now I've got water. Now it's a whole different ballgame. I've got water coming in my face. Now I'm getting things that can wash me, right? Now at the end of it, I'm trying to get all that stuff off and dry myself and get rid of the water, the very thing that I tried to put on me at the beginning. So, and now I've finished showering. Now, but the story about showering is I've had a shower. But the agency is very, very different. And the problem's very different. Is the problem getting my clothes off because I've got a disability? Is the problem water and it not being hot? Is the problem not having cleaning stuff? Is the problem getting dry afterwards, right? But in an agent's perspective, it's not, that's very different in terms of taking a shower, right? So the way you can't deal with that complexity, it's literally intractable. It's just beyond tractability. So what you want to do is something like this framework gives a sense of, if we were to try and find moments when someone had a challenge taking showers, so out of all the things we could have done, right? Oh, it's going all over the place. Showers somehow is worth talking about. And out of the experience of showers, this experience of showering was particularly relevant for what, now let's just see what actually happened then, not what are, and I like this. Cynthia Kurtz's great quote is, "A teaspoon of story is worth a bucketful of opinion." Because the thing with stories, you can keep reinterpreting it, or you can link it. Opinion is kind of what it is. You can't do much with it. Having said that, that's not to say that we don't have a. I'm not in the context of sense making, and in the context of this level of complexity. Stories, micro stories, are more useful. In the context of a normal conversation or conveying your message to the board of an organisation, apart from it's too much, right? Because no one would know what it means. It only means something to someone who's got a contextual awareness of those stories. So it's only if you're talking to people in Africa. And I was talking to this girl who had a cup of water. That's all the water they had for the day to bathe, is a cup of water, right? Now, so if you want to have conversations and stories about how to bathe in Africa, you want to do it with the same people who've got the same kind of background and experience. There's no point talking about bathing with that and me here in Toronto and someone in Brazil, and it's because we're still at this very kind of macro, so we want to be able to work down. So the question would be, what kind of scale is the cybernetic hub operating at? What's the scale of some of the things in there? What's the scale of some of the people who are maybe part of the solution space or problem space? And what would be then a set of 6 scenarios that could play out in that? And all we can do is probably map out 2 or 3 agents in there. And then the other agents, it's probably still intractable, but that extra dimension of agents is when infusion space could be used. That's if you want to drill even further into a particular context, right? But for the most cases, at least we're now talking about agents. But at the moment, this diagram can't do that. But this is the bit, Tiberius, that's key. Is it to solve it? It wouldn't be to map out all possible permutations, because there's no computer on Earth that could even do that. So what it is, it's more about how to be able to show one scenario in here, or maybe a sort of a broader set of scenarios. No, maybe one scenario or something, and then that way, the way that you compute it is literally just say, this is what it seemed to be. I'm not saying I know why, and it might be that some of the stories are absolutely irrelevant, but that's not the point. That might be just the point is that you can always take something off the table, but the question is, does the thing you put on the table add more bias and assumptions and complexity than you can process anyway? So then suddenly you're in this intractability problem, and you have to go back to a systemic macro kind of opinion. And that, anyway, that's the. Do you think we can do that with this canvas? Because I think we are not far from being able to do that. Like, could you place some agents in relation to just, and I'm not going to start saying any more, because that would just be me giving my guesswork, right? Or the other way, anyway, that.
Yeah, I just want to say that we are already starting to wrap up here, because it's almost here in Brazil 1:36 p.m. So we already have our usual 1 hour and a half touchdown. But yeah, I think that we got somewhere here with your provocation, Stefan. I just want to hear from TB if what me, Stefan, and Tim add on to your perspective, the framing of your perspective, if it adds or makes it even or it adds quality to your perspective, or it just makes it more non-intelligible for you, TB. Oh, and Laudin is here. Laudin is here now.
No, it's an ongoing discussion, and there's always new things that pop up and new, help us clarify things. So I'm taking notes. I added some more clarity in the document of IOPA, so that's all fine. It's all fine. We have different perspectives, but that's good.
Yeah, it's
Helps
complicated.
us.
Yeah, hey,
Yeah.
Lauding, we're ready. We're already wrapping up here. So it would be nice for you just to say hi, guys, and bye, guys, at the same time. Hi, guys, and bye,
Oh no,
guys.
I'm chewing. I thought I was muted. Sorry, I've been chewing my cracker in your ears.
Okay. Yeah, we have a very interesting discussion here, conversation
What'd you
around.
talk about?
Yeah, we talked about the current work around IOPA and the way that it didn't go further because of the different way that we understand what could we actually do there, do with the let's say with the objectives, with the goals, right, of their perspective of the project itself, and we're talking about ways to bridge with them, bridge with their perspective and how we can thrive through these ways. But yeah, it was a very long, let's say, and profound conversation around that. And as usual, Stefan gives us the background for us to explore, and was really interesting. But if Stefan, if you want to appreciate a little bit and contextualize a little bit for loading and make your checkout, feel free, man. We can start it to do the checkout if you.
Oh, cool. Thanks. Yeah. So I got a dash. Well, I suppose it was just this idea that I was speaking to another person recently this week, and we have a kind of a set of logics that we bring in. We have the logics of how we codify and structure things, and we've been trying to process that logics, and we've also been trying to then think about agency and how agency is understood, which then breaks down very much to different situations. And there's a challenge then to try and get into which kind of logic are we thinking, and how can we then get something coherent in that as we get these logics tied down to then where is agency in all of that, in terms of particulars. And it's challenging because this is the challenge I think a lot of people have. So we've been looking at some of the work with IOPA and how they might bridge things down, because to some of the extent it's working out where are we at, where are some of the people we are connecting to at, and that is the fact that that's where we're at is not a right or wrong thing. It's not like either is wrong. It's more about that is a way to ground. How do you find common ground to be able to ground not only the logics and that side of things, but the potential to go off into particular agencies, which traditionally can be so complex that it's just overwhelming, right? You can't contextualize that. So the idea is we want to be able to go to very, very particular agencies which will shed some light on these more and bring that back with us as like gifts. And we're making progress, I think, because we're trying to, we've got a number of different priorities we're trying to be able to hold, and none of them can all happen at the same time. So it's almost like we have to have, they're all important, right? Yet none of them can take center stage and dominate everything.
Yeah, and talking about complexities, allowing Tim, TB, and Stefan, finally we were able to write something that was understandable for the RWI, Gitcoin, Ethereum crowds to be able to join in a round, in a specific round that has a relationship with a new network in the RWI ecosystem called Greenpill, right? And I just want to show you guys as a perk for us to for us to wrap up here our today's RWI touchdown. But before I would love to see, I want to know if Tim wants to make some commentary too. Before I do.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Hi, Lauren. It's good to see you. But that I can't even believe you asked Stephen to try to summarize that conversation. I was when you said, "Oh, hey, Stephen, could you summarize?" I was like, "Oh my God." Yeah. So yeah, it was that was quite a chat. Yeah, very relevant to lots of things I'm yeah been thinking about and trying to. So yeah, I could never imagine attempting to sum up any of that. So
Yeah, I even
enjoyed it,
have
enjoyed it, and nice to see everyone. Thanks.
yeah, I even have the title, guys, for today's touchdown is the shower shower complexity theory, something like that, just for to be very
Yeah.
cheesy.
Showered in complexity. Yeah.
Showering complexity, yeah, that would be nice. So I want to share with you guys here, just for you guys to have a glimpse of it. I'm going to put the link for it so you guys can take a look after. Um, here you go. I created a header for the it's in the builder space of Bitcoin, right? And it's so I create a header highlighting the most important achievements of RWI since it was started to be co-created more than 1.5 years ago, right? So a series of Web3 unconference and decentralized events throughout Brazil, right? More than 20 projects related to Web2, Web3, regeneration, and refi in Brazil, and more, plus more than 100 people, right, related. We have more than 4,000 peer-to-peer interactions within Web3 BR projects, and plus 1,000 hours of Zoom call in 2023. And we have this interface with Green Pill Network, Gava Angels, that is angel investments club here in Brazil, and of course, What the Fuck 3 Pega Visão Caps that has that concept of treating peer-to-peer entrepreneurship as a open learning dynamics, right? So here we go, and you can read it. I started doing this provocation here, Tim, and to be
That was an incredible introduction, Vinicius. That summary you just gave.
yeah.
Okay, thanks for that.
Yeah, and new Web3 cyber culture is possible. In new Web3, from user-centric Web2 hyperconsumerism to Web3 regenerative co-creator proxemism, right? And this was AI-generated image. I gave the prompt to generate this. And in the algorithmic cybernetics of Web2, we are raw material, product, and user. So I put it this usual, bots of Web2 saying what the fuck. Surely, with the current Web3, we stopped being products once we became owners of our own data, but that's not enough. Web cyber sovereignty is needed too, so not enough, right? In this emergent context, RWI as a cultural Web3 regenerative protocol aims to co-create in real-life cyber cultural primitives that currently do not exist on the Web3 space, linked to paradigms that gives new meanings to what wealth should already be massively considered in this collapsing decades of the 20th century. The way of generating, and as well as how to regeneratively endeavors it, right? So we go, encouraging interactive peer-to-peer coordination in between for and within people and projects, via and peer-to-peer co-creative net-weaving flow of activities, events, and all sorts of disruptive experience through playful, reflective, and relational open learning journeys that generates different proofs of humanization that each person and or project carries out in their own time. I put those clocks from that artist, that Spanish artist, I forgot his name.
Salvador Dali.
Yeah, Salvador Dali. Yeah, that's it. Aiming to slow down to accelerate, catalyzing critical shifts in perception, right? Such as if we are complex beings, abundance is naturally embedded in our own existence, not artificial scarcity. Therefore, projects, for instance, can literally be reframed as conceptual proofs of living interconnected organisms, not standalone zero-sum organizations. And I put the graphs here of Anelos. I don't know if you guys know Anelos Swiftman's She does a beautiful work around the transition from this degenerative, extractive society that we live in to a more collaborative and regenerative society. So I put her graphs here because it explains a lot, and the link to it, right? And we talk about the common pools of shareable resources, searching for new indexes for network shared value, and providing real abundance experiences for each person project, and fostering a culture of mutual availability access to all types of resources. And I put here a little screenshot of one of the common pools that we worked on last year. For the co-realization of any activity from decentralized events such as Primavera Gerativa in the Brazil spring of 2022, or Feijoada Safa in the Brazil summer of 2023, to the interweaving of benefits via NFT of actions such as the Feijão Amigo from Agroflorestal, or for the projects themselves that are going through the dynamics of RWI's critical mapping to spark the ignition for their own common pools of shareable resources, where each shared resource is recognized as a proof of abundance and registered by the projects in Ethereum ReFi ecosystem through the interface that RWI has with Greenpill Brazil. For this year, RWI will netweave interfaces with different types of DLTs and DAG, holochain, internet computer, hashgraph, so on. Thus, creating entire regenerative peer-to-peer network dynamics, undertaking projects on the Web3 based on the logic of abundance and commonship culture, resulting in a capacity for impact and resilience that differs greatly from the typical startup, since the project, when undertaken in an intertwined network and on-chain, in addition to being baked by all types of collective intelligence, will be giving life to new regenerative Web3 blueprints of wealth generation, right? RWI in a nutshell: more than human interface with AI, abundance as daily practice, societal tissue regeneration, commonship as a source code for resource mutual access, and trustfulness instead of trustless. That's it, guys. I just want to share almost in first hand with you guys, because this is came out yesterday. So
Incredible. Wow.
yeah, it's happening. Because you see, when we tried last year to make any type of interface with Gitcoin was horrible. Even the experience, remember TB and Laurie, that we tried to do with Taudao and Sensorica two years ago?
It's early days and pretty complex environment, and we were new, I think, and learning. So that's the beauty, though, of, like, I always liked that framing, in the Sensorica space that Tiberius sort of kicked off, or we seemed to sort of resonate around the sort of experimental space and that sort of notion of learning, right? And like you mentioned, open learning environment, and I've kind of felt like that. I watched a little bit, maybe from the sidelines on that one a little bit, but it looked like a really rapid learning endeavor, right? So, but yeah, but this is incredible. I can't believe what I just saw.
Yeah, and it came out of here, Tim, out of our conversations, our explorations, our RWI touchdowns.
Wow.
It really came out of our conversations, explorations here.
Wow. Well, I can see all kinds of things that need to get built, right? And I can see all those, so there's a lot. Wow. Anyway. Okay.
So guys, that's it. I put a link on the chat for you guys can see it. And if you want just to give a few last words for us to wrap up here, would be nice. Loading, TV, Stefan.
I gotta go, guys. I just want to say bye. Nice to see you.
Ciao, nice hearing from you.
Okay, Louding.
I'll just say thanks.
Yeah,
I've got to take David to the library now, so I've got to run. But it's just good to see this synthesis. I think there's, again, there's applications you're seeing that would never have crossed my mind. So this is lots of different worldviews, experiences, and applications. So it's great. So thanks very much. Brilliant.
Ciao. Thanks, Vinicius. That was amazing. Right on.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, guys.
Can you send the link to that thing
What TB?
on Gitcoin? Your page on Gitcoin. I want to go through it
Yeah,
again.
it's still in their builder
Okay,
platform,
got it.
but it's going through appreciation to curation now. But the people from Greenfield here in Brazil said that it's going to be on, certainly.
Yeah.
So
Perfect.
yeah, and TB, this type of framing that RWI actually is now, it can serve as a reference for all sorts of talks that we have in here. So yeah. So guys, let's go.
Yeah. Have a nice day.
It was a wonderful touchdown. Bye bye. See you around.